Welcome back to Newsday. The Edo State Police Command on Saturday night announced that an unspecified number of travelers waiting to board a train from Igweben in Edo State to Warri in Delta State were kidnapped by suspected herdsmen. The command, in a statement issued by its spokesman, Chidi Nwabuzo, said that the incident occurred about 4 p.m. on Saturday. According to the statement, the suspected herdsmen, who were armed with AK-47 rifles, invaded the train station and shot sporadically into the air before marching off with an unspecified number of intending travelers into the nearby bush. The statement added that in the process of the abduction, some of the passengers sustained bullet wounds, just as the police disclosed that bush combing and rescue operations had begun to rescue those that were kidnapped. Rise News has a team headed for the scene of the suspected herdsman attack near Benin City, Edo State. They will be there very shortly. In the meantime, we have joining us now to provide some perspective Dr. Kabir Adamu, a security analyst and managing director of Beacon Consultant Limited. Great to have you, Dr. Adamu. This unfolding story definitely rings a bell, no doubt. But there were assurances last year by the Nigeria Railway Corporation to encourage citizens to patronize rail travel. Apparently, there's a question mark on securing that mode of transportation. What do you make of this scenario?
And thank you very much. And let me start by saying a huge Happy New Year to you all. And to, agree with you that unfortunately, despite this assurance by the Nigerian Railway Corporation and the Ministry of Transport, which was told to us by the Minister of Transport himself, it appears that the railway infrastructure is still vulnerable to these types of attack. And in this instance, in a location that frankly would, if I was going to rank the states with higher vulnerability in terms of this attack by gunmen, Edo State would probably not have come as part of the 10 states that were vulnerable. So yeah, a little bit surprising. And of course, given the time of the attack, 4 p.m., and the fact that this particular local government was not ranked as one of the local governments with the high rate of kidnap for ransom incidents in Edo State, all of this makes it, unfortunately, quite a remarkable and unfortunate development.
All right, Dr. Adamu, you just mentioned something very salient. You mentioned that if you were to rank states or probably cities whereby you would actually predict attacks like this, Edo State will not actually fall into that particular category or will not rank high in that particular category. Now talk to us. At the moment, looking at what has happened with what happened last March in Kaduna, have we come to that particular precipice whereby we'll say that it's high time we shut down the rail station for now till we can assure Nigerians that incidences like this do not occur again?
So yeah, on the one hand, that would seem a reasonable thing to do. But on the other hand, if you look at how critical rail transportation is to any economy, including the Nigerian economy, then I wouldn't toe that path. What I think would be more logical is to include expertise into the rail transportation, that security expertise now, or rather security risk management expertise. There are 4 layers of security protection that every infrastructure should have. And I'm not seeing that, unfortunately. Neither am I seeing it in the rail sector. And by this, I mean the entire infrastructure surrounding the rail system, not just the rail line, but terminals like the one that was attacked, as an example, in Igweben, in Edo State local government. And this is simple. It's the 101 of security. You have to have, in this instance, these are gunmen that moved. If, and I need to make a correction, the statement by the DPO did not mention herdsmen. Rather, it's a lot of media houses that attributed it to herdsmen. What the DPO said is that gunmen attacked, and then, of course, some media houses attributed it to herdsmen. Now, in my consultancy, we know that there are about 3 major threat elements within Edo State. One of them includes the armed herdsmen, which I would rather call armed militia. They may be of an ethnic, affiliation, but I think to avoid stigmatization and profiling, I would rather just call them that. And I think that is what the police did. They did not attribute it. If an investigation confirms that indeed they were herdsmen, and I'm sure the police would mention that. Now, so intelligence appears to have been completely missing in the response. These gunmen, whoever they were, moved from their location, arrived the train terminus, opened fire, abducted the persons they wanted to abduct, and then left with them without any form of resistance. So clearly, the four elements of a good security structure, those four layers were completely missing. And what are these layers? The ability to detect. If we had that capacity to detect, they would have been seen even before they arrived the rail station. Now, the second element, which is the ability to deny. If you detect them, then you should have the capacity to deny them access to whatever location they want to attack. The third one is the ability to delay them. So whatever resistance that was put in place should have been able to delay them until reinforcement arrives, which is the last one, the response element. So clearly, to direct response to your question, the four elements were missing. And until we install these elements across the entire infrastructure of the Nigerian Railway Corporation, I would strongly recommend that we suspend operations.
Very good, Dr. Adamu. Now, if the roads are becoming a no-go area for interstate travel and railway is also threatened at this rate, these are the most affordable options for most Nigerians, by the way. Is this not a sign of escalation of insecurity in Nigeria in general, whether we call them gunmen or, herdsmen?
Definitely. So we're about to release our 2022 annual report, the Beacon Consulting Nigeria Security Report. And unfortunately, in 2022, 11,000 Nigerians were killed across the 36 states of the Federation and almost in over 600 local governments. That is worrisome for any nation. And we're in a pre-election year. And I think these are the things that we need to be discussing. How do we reduce that 11,000 to maybe just 100 persons being killed in a year? So yes, I agree with you. These are very disturbing developments. They affect critical components of our national infrastructure. Mind you, we've got several government agencies that have responsibility for the protection of this infrastructure. And so my number one recommendation for this administration and for the incoming administration is accountability within the public sector, especially with regards to security. You referred to the March incident. I'm not aware that one person has been held accountable for allowing that incident to occur. This one has just occurred. I hope that someone is held responsible and then he is accountable for whatever happened. And that accountability can come in different forms. Don't forget that apart from the federal government, security structures that we have in Edo State, we've also got the state level security structures. And all, unfortunately, despite all of this presence, these things are able to happen. So going forward, to reduce that 11,000 persons being killed in 2022, we need to enhance accountability so that persons who we give trust and responsibility to, and when they fail us like that, we know that we would hold them accountable. I think the next person to hold that position will know that if he allows something like that to happen, then he would be held responsible for. And that, I think that's the way forward.
All right, you mentioned that we are in the political season. Certainly the scorecards are actually being drawn up or appraisals are being done in terms of what has happened with the APC and insecurity in the last 4 years. Let's limit it to 4 years and not stretch it forward to probably the last 8 years. How would you rate the level of insecurity in Nigeria? You mentioned 11,000. That's very, very fearsome, and that's very, very worrisome. Talk to us. How would you rate the APC and what has happened in the Buhari administration in the last 4 years? Is it the worst it has ever been? Because some are saying it used to be worse than this. Some are saying that it's just only bad and it can't get any worse than this. Talk to us about this.
So I would restrict my response to two areas. I'll speak about data, and then I'll also speak about reform. Data tells us that there has been an improvement. So if we look at you advise that we restrict it to only 4 years. Now, if we restrict it to only 4 years, the President Buhari administration from 2019 to 2022, in terms of data, it hovered between 7,000 to 9,000. Last year, as an example, it was 9,000 persons that was killed. The year before, it was 7,000. And then, in between, like from 2019, 2020, it was around 7,000. So clearly, and why it's difficult for me to restrict to that, I need to go back to 2014 when he took over. That year, unfortunately, 13,000 Nigerians were killed. And if you recall, Nigeria hosted the group that became known as the deadliest terror group in the world, which was the group we all call Boko Haram, or Jamaat al-Dawat wal Jihad. And then Buhari's administration was able to bring down deaths attributed to this particular group. Unfortunately, there were new emergence, including the banditry issue in Northwest, and then the southward movement of that particular group, and another group that emerged from the Jamaat al-Dawat wal Jihad group, which is the Islamic State in West Africa province. So all of this happened under the Buhari administration, which unfortunately has now created a new threat front, if you allow me to call it like that, or rather a new threat front. So security has changed. We've seen the manifestation of new levels of threat and risk elements under the Buhari administration. One thing that we don't talk enough about is, unfortunately, the killings by security forces themselves. We've seen an increase in that. And unfortunately, the best exemplification of that is the EndSARS protest that happened in 2020, also under the Buhari administration. So all of these are things that were, if you allow me to use the word legacy, are legacies that would go into the 2023 elections, that whoever take over in May this year will have to address in a manner that would help reduce this number. So I would say that in certain instances there has been progress, and I've used the Boko Haram issue to explain that. Unfortunately, in other instances, we've not seen so much progress. Now, the second thing I said I would talk about is the issue of reform. One of the positive legacies of the Buhari administration is the area of legal provisions for addressing security. So the administration has been able to look at laws such as the Police Act. It has revised that Police Act. It was able to introduce the National Security Strategy, revised 2019, and several other laws like that. But that is, I would say, just a pinch of the various areas of law reform, especially in the area of security, that would need to be addressed. Again, a legacy going into 2023 is the need for security sector reform, enhanced provisions. I mean, people have asked the question, why is Nnamdi Kanu tried under the Terrorism Act? Is it because perhaps there is no law that would have been more appropriate for his offenses? These are things that we need to interrogate, and whoever is taking over in 2023 would also need to address. If we have laws that are either moribund or that are non-existent, one good example I would give is drones. Currently, you can see drones everywhere. What aspect of our law would, for instance, if one madman decides to arm a drone and attack a particular installation, what law are we going to use to address that? So that's a legacy that I think would need to be addressed. I hope I've been able to address in just two areas. There are several other areas I would be able to talk about. An example, the budgetary provisions for security agencies, the increase in the number of security personnel, corruption within the security personnel, etc. But I think let me just restrict it to those two areas that I've talked about.
All right, Dr. Adamu, and news just coming in as that that region of Edo State where the train services is to be, usually takes place, has been shut down by the Nigerian Railway Corporation. We'll get more details regarding that. So there's no travel regarding rail travel on that particular route. Interesting, you should mention, the issue of reforms as well. But pundits have argued, Dr. Adamu, that there might be political undertones in actually finding a final solution to the security issues we're having in Nigeria. And riding on that, do you think we have the security infrastructure to tackle these issues to the barest minimum, you think?
Let me start by your statement regarding the politicization of security. We would be kidding ourselves and not being realistic if we assume that there is no politics in security anywhere in the world. There is an element of politics in security. As an example, if you are the president, you're not likely to appoint anyone within certain security positions if you can't guarantee their loyalty. This happens everywhere in the world. But what is different, I think, from the Nigerian context is that national interest should supersede whatever interest. So even if there is loyalty, for instance, to the incumbent, the national interest should supersede that loyalty. Where the incumbent does anything against the national interest, that person occupying that seat should know that he or she should not comply with that, for the simple reason that their history and we will judge both of them, and nobody wants to be on the wrong side of history in this instance. So again, I think we should be clear in admitting, yes, there should be some elements of politics, but that politics should never go against our national interests. And maybe that is where we need to come back and ask ourselves, what are our national interests? Is it the protection of the lives and property of the Nigerian citizen as enshrined in our national constitution? If that is the case, then any interest outside of that should be jettisoned for the purposes of that protection. Second point around reform of the security sector. Yes, I think it's absolutely important that we, in moving forward, we put that element. I've had the good fortune of meeting some, presidential candidates, and I've put forward this question to them: what do they think about security sector reform? And frankly, without meaning to be partisan in any way, most of them don't even understand what security sector reform is all about. And I think that is what the fourth estate of the realm should perhaps start to highlight going into the elections proper, because this is the period that perhaps we have the opportunity to ensure these things are enshrined within their manifesto, so that once whoever wins is able to do that. What do we mean by security sector reforms and governance issues? How do we ensure that aspects of human rights? Just last week, and the last week of December into the first week of January, we've seen summary executions, extrajudicial killings by security agencies. We've seen heavy-handedness by our security personnel. All of these things should not be in Nigeria of 2023. We should be able to address these things frontally. You recall what happened in Lagos, in the Lekki area, both in December and then in this early January, and then in several other parts of Nigeria. We need to address that in a manner that ensures that the police, these other security agencies that we have in Nigeria in 2023, understand that the ethos of their functions is for the protection of the life and citizens of the law-abiding Nigeria. And anything outside of that should be dealt with in a manner that shows that we as Nigerians cannot accommodate anything that is extrajudicial.
All right, Dr. Adamu, I have two quick questions. Number one, first of all, some might even say from your assessment or your scorecard that you might have given the Buhari administration a little bit of pass mark when you said that the numbers of casualties have actually dropped over the last couple of years. And also when you talked about reforms and what had been done. But putting it side by side and juxtaposing that against the fact that, like you mentioned earlier in your statement, that accountability is at its lowest ebb. Things like this happen. Nobody gets fired. Nobody gets dismissed. Nobody gets called. Nobody probably gets his leg hung to the fire and being asked questions of how did he get to this. Rather, we see this lethargic nature whereby the presidency do not really think that when there are failings, people need to be replaced, or probably the security architecture needs to be reformed. What do you have to say to that? Because that is huge. Because like you said, this can come and go again, and no one will be held accountable for these failings. And secondly, some are still carrying the illusion that terrorism here in Nigeria is limited to one part of Nigeria. With what has happened in Edo State, is it clear to all that this is now a national problem as against a regional problem?
So that we don't jump ahead of ourselves, it's too early to classify what happened in Edo as terrorism. It is a criminal act. Police will investigate and identify who is behind it and whether their objective was terroristic or not. So at this stage, let's leave it for what it is. It's attack by armed gunmen against public infrastructure. When we know more, we can categorize it as whether it's terroristic or not. But I agree with you totally that the issue of has unfortunately almost permeated the entire 8 years or 7+ years that the Buhari administration has been. But is it specific to the Buhari administration? The answer is no. I can cite instances for you under the previous administration of, former President Obasanjo, under Yaradua, under Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, where this issue has always been a forefront. In summary, and because I don't want to go beyond what the remit of this conversation is, this is a legacy of, unfortunately, the military era, where public issues were not held. There was no accountability. If the military decides, for instance, to be accountable, it would be accountable. But if it decides, as an example, not to be accountable, then it would not be accountable. And I think this is a legacy that we've carried on. Another area that we also need to contend with is the parliament. The parliament does have a responsibility in ensuring that the executive arm of government is held accountable. Let's not forget that the entire security architecture is under the executive arm of government. So where they fail to hold themselves accountable, the natural consequence would be for the legislature to hold them accountable. So if we're not seeing that, we also need to go back to the legacy that has been bequeathed to us by the military themselves. The arm of government that suffered most under the military is the parliament. And despite the fact that the Fourth Republic is in over 20 years of existence, we haven't seen the parliament shaking itself from that legacy of military rule to be able to look at the securities sector and call them to account wherever there are failures. There are several instances, including NSAS, that shook this nation. What role did the parliament play, for instance, in investigating those unfortunate things that happened during the NSAS protest, or that even led to the NSAS protest? So again, I'm hoping that in the 10th assembly that would emerge post the 2023 elections would be able to look at itself and say, okay, we've come of age. Where there are infractions within the security sector, we are not just going to invite them. We're going to do a parliamentary investigation, just like we see in other spheres of the world, including the US. If there is a congressional hearing and a certain member of the executive arm of government is invited, you see how uncomfortable they are. Because everything they say there can be held against them. And so that is what I'm hoping to see in the 10th Assembly, where the National Assembly has that power. And it does have that power. It's just for it to exercise that power, check itself of the legacy of the military rule that we've had, exercise that power in a manner that the executive arm of government would know that if they don't do it themselves, then the parliament is going to do that. And let's not also forget that the judicial arm of government also has that responsibility in terms of the responsibilities that are shared in the three arms of government. So where these two fail, I expect to see the judiciary also coming in to play that role. So I wouldn't restrict all of the blame, as it were, to Buhari as a person or to his administration. It is a shared responsibility that we as a nation should ask. And I'll go back to the fact that the fourth realm should also play that role. And highlighting this point, and I must commend you, the fact that you are giving me the platform to speak about it, you are doing your role. But again, in your reportage, I think it's also absolutely important that you expound these roles that can be played by not just the executive arm of government, but by the parliament, the legislative arm, and then, of course, the judicial arm of government. That's the only way I think we can move forward. If we think it's going to be done by the executive, the likelihood is no, because they are the beneficiaries of this. So if they're benefiting positively from it, it's not likely that they're going to cause the change. We are the ones that should move for that change.
Very good, Dr. Adamu. Now, from the Jonathan to the Buhari administration, government has invested heavily on rail travel with loans and expertise from China, as it were. Now, what do you propose an incoming government should focus on regarding securing travel routes, points of entry, and of course exit, because these are major routes for socio-economic development, as it were? And are we also making optimal use of intelligence reports at this rate?
Unfortunately, no. Let me start from the last part of your question. I hinted to that in my earlier response. There's a total failure of intelligence here. Although, to be circumspect, it's possible that the intelligence was shared, but it was never acted upon, because those are two different things. Intelligence is a cycle from collection to analysis to this aspect of the cycle. Then you would see what happened in Edo repeat itself. So at this stage, we're not sure if intelligence was shared. In the case of the March attack, we were told that intelligence was shared by the sitting governor of Kaduna State. And I am not aware that at any point in time that was denied by the Railway Corporation. Here, it's too early. We haven't received any information suggesting that intelligence was shared. But I want to think that if our intelligence collection capabilities, and I know that the Edo State governor invested massively in the area of intelligence analysis. So if we have an early warning system, which I know most state governments have, they do have early warning systems, they do have early response systems. So infusing this EWS, early warning systems, and ERS, early response systems, into the intelligence capabilities of the federal government is one other area that I'm hoping the administration that will come in post the 2023 elections will look closely at. If you've got good EWS and ERS systems at the state level, but these are not fed into the Federal Intelligence Fusion Center, then that's a gap. And again, this is an area that the Ministry of Interior should have looked into, before now even. But if they haven't, then I'm hoping that post-2023, whoever becomes the Minister of Interior would look at not just the federal intelligence collection capabilities, but the state-level intelligence collection capabilities. We're one nation, despite the fact that we're a federation, there are 36 states. Each of these 36 states is working towards one thing, which is ensuring the protection of the lives and property of the Nigerians. So if we have capabilities at the state level that we're not using, I think it's wrong. We need to use that, infuse that EWS and ERS into the federal collection capabilities so that we're able to move forward. Now, the second part of your question regarding security for railway services. One best way to approach this is the structure for the provision of security within the Ministry of Transport and within the Nigeria Railway Corporation. To the best of my knowledge, there are appointments, persons who occupy the positions of either security directors or whatever name we want to call them. I think we need to move forward and align ourselves with the international focus on security at the moment, which is security risk management. So instead of just having security departments, why not have security risk departments? Now, in doing that, what we would be able to achieve is that the risk manager will be able to identify the vulnerabilities that this railway infrastructure or the entire transportation system are exposed to. And once you identify the vulnerabilities, you evaluate them, and then you put in place mitigation measures. Earlier on, I mentioned the 4 layers of security protection that should be in place for every infrastructure. Every risk manager knows this. And I'm hoping that the Minister of Transport is listening to this, and he'll be able to, without being partisan or, for lack of a better word, embracing the merit that risk management and security protection requires, appoint persons who are capable to implement a security posture and a security protection system that is apt and appropriate for the vulnerabilities that exist within the rail transport as well as several other transport systems in Nigeria. At the moment, we are agreed, and I don't think anyone is in doubt that there are vulnerabilities that unfortunately have not been addressed.
All right, security expert Dr. Kabir Adamu, I want to say thank you very much for dissecting this unfortunate news that we've just received about the attack in Edo State.